Hello, Mordrim here. Today I want to share with you my Tesla coil build guide for the Sorcerers. This one utilizes a lot of different procs and lucky hits, as well as the Frost Orb enchantment, which gives us a ton of different projectiles that freeze, make enemies vulnerable, chill them, stun them, and so on and so forth. We are not going to utilize any burn damage, so we are not going to dip into the blazing passives, but we don't actually need to. We deal a ton of damage regardless, and we have exceptionally good mana sustain. Now this build is one of the most fun things I have played in this game. It's extremely fast, an audiovisual pleasure, and the clear speed is insane. However, this build struggles with two types of enemies. First, objectives that do not get CC'd, meaning compounds of flesh or other stationary objectives. And bosses are also a bit wonky unless you can CC them. When they are CC'd, you completely obliterate them. At the end of the video, you can look at extended gameplay. For now, I will go over the skills and how to play this build on a basic level. So first, look at the skills. We are utilizing Spark as our basic ability. This ability deals quite a lot of damage on its own, but it's used to increase our critical strike chance per cast to up to 8. 8 might not sound like a lot, but it's 25% increased base crit chance for this character. So this one is actually insane. It also gives us a ranged option with a high lucky hit chance, because every single hit of this ability has its own lucky hit. Now this build strictly utilizes 3 damaging abilities. The first one being Charge Bolts. Now Charge Bolts is going to be the one ability we are constantly going to cast. It releases 5 bolts and deals a lot of damage per hit. So this ability is the highest damaging ability that the Sorceress has, just based on the base skill damage of this skill. Next, we're going to utilize Frozen Orb with its enchantment. Now Frozen Orb chills enemies for quite a lot, and it has a chance to freeze enemies. Frozen enemies get the vulnerable status. The enchantment effect of this one is a 24% chance to launch a Frozen Orb that has a different behavior than the regular Frozen Orb. Now for this one, you can think of this one like Nature's Fury, meaning whenever we cast our Charge Bolt, there is a chance to launch a Frozen Orb. In the defensive cluster, we're going to utilize Frost Nova as well as Teleport. Now both of those are essential for this build to function, because Frost Nova has a relatively low cooldown and a high freeze duration. Now freeze gives us a massive damage multiplier because it counts as chill and freezing, and it also applies vulnerable to any enemy hit. And the Teleport ability is then combined with this unique, the Raiments of the Infinite. Now the Raiments of the Infinite have a relatively low drop chance. Now this chest armor gives our teleport another ability. Every single enemy that's close to us, to the teleport location, is going to be pulled in and then stunned. This increases the cooldown of our teleport, but it has a relatively low cooldown anyway. This one triggers a ton of different multipliers that are based on stunned enemies. It also has a very high lucky hit chance, meaning it spawns our second enchantment, which is Ball Lightning. Ball Lightning has a lucky hit chance, an enchantment slot that triggers on a critical strike with a 30% chance. This means our teleport has basically a 30% chance to spawn a stationary Ball Lightning on the specific location we land on. Since we are pulling all enemies into one spot, and basically there's 3 or 4 different Ball Lightnings spawning in that specific spot, all of those are going to be damaged by the Ball Lightning. And this Ball Lightning still has the lucky hit chance for each specific hit while zapping enemies. And it zaps enemies for like 50 to 60 times, giving this one an insane amount of lucky hit chance. And this lucky hit chance can then be combined with a specific stat on your gear. When we scroll down here, we can see lucky hit mana. We have a 5% chance to restore 33% mana on our character, which is basically found on relics and your gloves. Preferably you only want this one on the relics, but I will go over that in a bit. All of those combined with other things like, for example, Invigorating Conduit. Whenever we pick up a crackling energy, we restore mana. We don't have any mana issues at all, especially when we combine this one with a specific legendary node found here, which gives us 10 mana on stunning a close enemy. And to top everything off, we are also using Unstable Current, and Unstable Current then gives us a buff that lets us spawn core, conjuration and mastery shock skills whenever we use a shock skill. This means whenever we use our charge bolts or our spark, we're going to spawn a ball lightning, a lightning spear, or a charge bolt, which gives us a ton of mana, a ton of damage, and it just feels extremely nice to press. Now this one has a relatively high cooldown, but we can combine this one with the keystone overflowing energy to lower the cooldown of this ability whenever our crackling energy hits an enemy, meaning our teleport and our unstable current both have a relatively low cooldown. As for the playstyle, let's look for an enemy pack, like so. We pull them together, charge bolt, down. And this one is just for a small pack. Let's look for a bigger one, like for example this one. We can pull them together, freeze them, and basically nuke every pack like that. We don't have our cooldowns here, but that's no problem. We still spam a ton of our abilities. We never go home. Look at our mana. Like so, we can cast our lightning bolt whenever we have 50 stacks on here. This one only stacks whenever we have it on our ability bar. If we don't have this one on our ability bar, we cannot stack this stun. That's very important. It works the same for basically every single ability that doesn't have a counter in this specific buff bar. Now here we have a big juicy elite. We teleport, we stun them, and we nuke them. And that's basically it for the whole playstyle of this build. And don't forget to weave in your spark for that essential 8% crit chance buff. Next, I'm going to go over the aspect. For the helmet, go with Ever Living. Ever Living gives us a 25% less damage taken from crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies. For the chest, go with the Raiment of the Infinite. Like I already mentioned, I think this one is weighted towards specific seeds of a specific character. So if you're unlucky with this one, make another Sorceress basically, or try to farm blind burrows. I think I've dropped 3 of them in that specific dungeon. So target farming like that does work. So just run as many blind burrows as possible. Now, does this build work without the raiments? Well, I think yes, but you have to do some changes. Specifically for the weapon, you have the aspect of the conceited. Instead of this one, you go with the ball lightning aspect. That's specifically the gravitational one. Then makes it possible to have your ball lightning surround you constantly, which then stuns the enemies for the whole duration, just for 1 second, but it's more coverage basically if you do not have the raiment. If you do not have the raiment, you can go with a lot more damage reduction on the chest, total armor on the chest, and the protector aspect, which gives us another barrier, which is also great for this build because we do rock a ton of barrier on this build, and damage reduction while injured applies to the barrier. So when we are on low life and to trigger a barrier, we are going to enjoy basically not 7k barrier, but 4 times that amount, because we can stack damage reduction to like 80%, and that multiplies that barrier and so on. It's a ton of mitigation. So it's just another very important mechanic to keep you alive. Next, the gloves. The gloves are going to run the frozen orbit aspect. This one gives our frozen orb the ability to stay in place after reaching its destination, and then it's going to explode for another 2 waves of damage. Those explosions still have the chance to make enemies vulnerable, like stated here. Frozen orb explodes, dealing damage, chilling enemies, and then it has a chance to make enemies vulnerable. So this one is extremely important for this build to apply vulnerable to a lot of enemies. For the pants, disobedience, we're dealing a ton of hits, especially with our lightning procs like ball lightning. So this one is up all the time, giving us a ton of additional armor. For the boots, I'm going with additional lucky hit chance when we have a barrier. We have barrier up all the time, so this one is basically 18 lucky hit chance all the time. We can, however, go with movement speed on this one. I just prefer the lucky hit chance because we are teleporting anyway all the time, so the additional movement speed is not really that important. Like I said, for the wand, you can go with conceited if you have the raiments. If not, go for the ball lightning one, gravitational aspect, you can see here. The conceited one gives us basically a ton of additional damage. For the amulet, we are going to go with the aspect of control. Stunning and freezing enemies is very easy with this build. Immobilizing is not. We are not going to immobilize enemies at all, which is not that big of a deal. It wouldn't have much of an uptime anyway, and we are still getting 44 times 44 more damage. We are then going to combine this one with Retribution. Retribution gives us more damage against stunned enemies. So that's the second effect of this one. Distant enemies have a chance to be stunned for 2 seconds with an 8% chance that is not influenced by lucky hit chance. So this one is giving us a ton of additional damage, especially with control. So we are omitting the immobilize, but we're getting another basically 40% increased damage, more multiplier. Then we have the stable aspect. The stable aspect is giving us a up to 10% chance to trigger a free cast of a shock skill when unstable current is not active. So when we have downtime on unstable current, we can still proc our ball light, which then applies the stun to enemies. And we are also having a chance to proc our charge bolt and our lightning lance. And for the focus, we are going to go with the crit one, core skills and mastery skills. cast above 100 mana have an increased chance to critically strike. This increased chance at 100 mana applies to procced spells, meaning when we look at our enchantments, the Frozen Orb that is cast by our Charge Bolt and the Ball Lightning that is procced both have that increased critical strike chance for the duration of that ability. This makes this one extremely strong. Next, let's go over the stats on the gear. For the helmet, go for maximum mana. Maximum mana is extremely important on this build because we want to get above 100 mana, especially with the aforementioned aspect. If we don't have 100 mana, we cannot proc this aspect, so having it on your helmet and one of your rings is extremely important. Then we are going to go with crowd control duration. Crowd control duration affects every stun, every freeze, basically every CC we have on this build. And since we want to CC enemies for a longer duration to apply our more multipliers to them, we are going to want this one on the helmet. Crowd control duration is basically a more multiplier for the DPS on this build. Then we have lucky hit chance while you have a barrier. We have barrier up all the time. This one is a very large modifier, up to 18%. This one is a low roll. So that's also something we want to have on the helmet. And the last one is cooldown reduction. Now cooldown reduction helps a ton because we want additional Frost Nova uptime. We want additional teleport uptime. We want additional unstable current uptime. All of those are extremely strong. So having more cooldown reduction on your helmet is really nice to have. Then for the chest, go with Raiment of the Infinite. If you don't have this one, total armor and damage reductions are very good on this one. So prioritize those whenever you don't have this chest. For the gloves, go with crit strike chance, lucky hit chance and attack speed. Those are the priority. For the last mod, I am currently rocking the lucky hit chance to proc resource. However, it is better to go with charge bolts on this one. And if you do want to scale your Frozen Orb, you can omit the lucky hit chance on this gloves and pick Frozen Orb. We get a ton of lucky hit chance on our gear, on our Paragon Board, and through our abilities, even on our skill tree. So the 10% you can grab on the gloves are not that big of a deal. For the pants, go for total armor, damage reduction while injured, and then additional damage reduction modifiers. However, you can omit one damage reduction for the Ball Lightning ranks. Those will give you a substantial boost in power. I personally just haven't had the pleasure to roll this one. For the boots, ranks to Frost Nova, ranks to teleport, movement speed and mana cost reduction. All of those will boost the playability of this build a ton. For the amulet, movement speed, then mana cost reduction, then damage reduction while injured is going to give us the most survivability on this build. And for the last one, ranks to shocking impact are basically useless because this one is currently bugged. When we look at the damage number, this one should give us 90% base damage, but it's displaying 3k damage. Well, that's weird, 90%, but only 3k damage. When we look at our charge bolts, those are giving us nearly 3k at 42%, meaning this one gives us only half the damage we should be getting. It's still going to hit for a ton of damage, but it's not nearly as good as, for example, Hoarfrost. When we look at Hoarfrost, that's this one. This one is giving us a more multiplier versus chilled enemies and a more multiplier versus frozen enemies. And with the ranks on the Emmy, we get 18% multiplied by 36%, which is a massive boost to our damage. I really do not recommend going with Glass Cannon. Glass Cannon is going to give us a more multiplier to damage taken, but it feels not like 3% more damage, but like 10% more damage taken because of how scaling works. So enemies have a baseline damage, then you are going to decrease your mitigation, and then this one applies. So it's multiplying the multiplier because we are having less mitigation between us and the enemy. Meaning Glass Cannon is deadly, don't pick this one, it's really not good. Next, the rings. Go for crit strike chance, crit strike damage with lightning skills and vulnerable damage. The vulnerable damage on this one and the last crit strike damage can be exchanged, and there is no priority of those because we get a ton of vulnerable damage through our Paragon Board. So both of them are going to increase our damage substantially. We don't want any increases like damage to frozen enemies on our rings because those we are getting through the Paragon Board with quite a high amount. However, we can also omit one of the crit damage modifiers with life, and one of your rings, like so, wants maximum mana. And lastly, the weapons. For the wand, go with crit strike damage, vulnerable damage, lightning crit strike damage, and damage versus crowd controlled or damage versus close. For the relic, go with lucky hit chance while you have a barrier, cooldown reduction, and chance to restore primary resource. This one is basically perfect for this build and should only be used for the utility. We get a lot of crit chance through other means, so we don't actually need to roll this one on the focus. Next, let's go over the skill tree. We are going to start with Spark, Enhanced Spark, and Glinting Spark. Now Glinting Spark gives us 8% crit strike chance. When we look at our character in the material section and scroll to the top, we're going to see around 35% crit strike chance. So having that additional 8% is going to be a substantial boost. In the next cluster, we're going to pick Charge Bolts 5.0, Enhanced Charge Bolts, and Destructive Charge Bolt. Now, Destructive Charge Bolts are going to decrease the damage enemies deal to us by 20%, which is a ton. Then we're going to pick Frozen Orb, also max this one, grab Enhanced Frozen Orb for more damage on the explosion, and Greater Frozen Orb for the chance to apply Vulnerable. Frozen enemies are always going to get the Vulnerable status. And the chill chance for the Frozen Orb is actually quite high, and whenever an enemy reaches 100% chill, they are going to get frozen, meaning our other multipliers and the vulnerable damage will then apply to the enemy. In the next cluster, we are only going to pick Teleport with Shimmering Teleport and Frost Nova, as well as Mystical Frost Nova. Both of those abilities are basically offensive as well as defensive abilities, which gives us a ton of additional damage reduction, a ton of additional damage, a ton of additional mobility, and a ton of additional CC. In the next cluster, we are going to pick Precision Magic for 15%. This one is additive, not multiplicative. Then Align the Elements and Protection. Whenever we use a cooldown, like for example our Teleport or our Frost Nova, we are going to get a barrier for 2 seconds. This one is based on the maximum life, meaning it's extremely strong. In the next cluster, we are going to pick Ball Lightning, 5 points in here, Enhanced Ball Lightning, and Mage Ball Lightning. Enhanced Ball Lightning is going to affect the damage rate of this ability by 200% of our attack speed bonus, which is a ton. And after hitting close enemies 50 times with Ball Lightning, which is done really fast, especially when we proc our Unstable Currents, Ball Lightning is going to stun enemies. However, we do need to cast this one. It's specified as a cast, not a proc. This means the lucky hit effect of the enhancement effect is not going to proc the stun. It's only going to stack up the buff. And you need to have this one on the bar to proc this effect. In the passive cluster, Static Discharge is really strong, giving us a chance to spawn Crackling Energy, which is then combined with Invigorating Conduit, which gives us 12 mana whenever we absorb a Crackling Energy. Crackling Energy is then also combined with our Keystone, which lowers our cooldown, but I will go over that in a bit. And then we have Shocking Impact. Now Shocking Impact on its own with the 90% lightning damage would be quite top tier. But it's not, because we are only getting half the damage. I still have it because I spec'd into it and I have the amulet for this one, and the amulet ranks do not work if I don't have this spec'd. But if I wanted to choose something else, I would go with, for example, Convolution. Convolution gives us a lucky hit chance to proc a stun on enemies for 3 seconds, which helps us stagger bosses much faster. And the 3 ranks are going to go into Hoarfrost for a better more multiplier. Now Hoarfrost is the one we pick. The Permafrost is not going to affect us all that much, only our Frozen Orb, but the Hoarfrost is global for every single damage type we deal. Electrocution is going to provide us with a very strong less damage taking modifier for enemies after they are struck by a critical strike from our shock skills for up to 6 seconds. That's a long duration. And for the ultimate ability, we're going to go with Unstable Currents, Prime Unstable Currents for an additional 25% attack speed, and Supreme Unstable Currents. Now Supreme Unstable Currents might sound like something you don't want to pick, but if you combine this one with Overflowing Energy, you basically have for the whole duration your generated Crackling Energy on your buff bar, and you're not going to consume it for the whole duration, giving us a ton of additional cooldown reduction. Basically, you're always full on this one. When this one drops off, you're still having your full bar of Crackling Energy, which then lowers the cooldowns even further, and you can then keep blasting all the time. So with enough cooldown reduction and with enough uptime on our Crackling Energy, this one has basically 100% uptime despite it having a very high cooldown. Not between packs, but when you're fighting, for example, a Cursed Chest. And like I said, the Keystone is Overflowing Energy, which gives us a ton of additional cooldown reduction. Next, let's go over the Paragon Board. We're going to start with the Glyph Destruction. Destruction is going to give us additional core skill crit damage, as well as a stacking more multiplier on critical strikes on enemies. The starter board has a very, very convenient way to get the additional dexterity. So this one is very point efficient. So that's why we picked this one. The Sorcerers also doesn't have many boards with a lot of dexterity. So this one with 39 is a ton. The next board is going to be Frigid Fate. Frigid Fate we're going to path through here first, then up to this glyph slot to grab Tactician, and we then are going to buff Weakness, which is a ton of additional vulnerable damage. There's a few vulnerable nodes here. So that's basically 15 plus 40, 45 at the last rank, so a ton of vulnerable damage. Then we are going to path through here to grab Enchant Master. Enchant Master is actually really good because it's a flat 20% more multiplier on all the proc chances, especially since Frozen Orb, the Frozen Orb proc chance is not going to be affected by lucky hit chance. That's very important. This one is like Nature's Fury. It's based on casts, not the lucky hit chance. And we're going to respec this board every time we unlock another board on this side, because we want those juicy thresholds to be as low as possible. Next, we're going to path through here to the Oppressive node, pick this one up, gives us additional vulnerable damage and damage reduction versus vulnerable enemies. Very strong cluster. Path through here and unlock the Static Search board. Now the Static Search board is going to give us mana on stunning close enemies. That's extremely strong and important for the sustain of this build in the terms of mana. Then we are going to unlock this glyph slot and level control to 15. Otherwise we're going to miss dexterity and cannot unlock the more multipliers provided by this glyph, because it's 10% for chilled or slowed enemies and 20% versus stunned or frozen enemies. So a 20% more multiplier, which is super strong. And we're getting a ton of additional increases to our crowd control damage. There's 2 additional dexterity nodes here, but they cost a ton of additional points, so it's not worth it to pick yet. Later on, when we finish at the board, those are pretty good. Next, we path through here, unlock this board, which is the Icefall board. This means you unspec this part, unlock this board, respec this part, and then path through here. Icefall is giving us additional barrier based on our maximum life for 5 seconds when we kill a frozen enemy. This one is super important for survivability as well as damage later on. And then we path through here to unlock this glyph slot, which then is going to be occupied by Frostbite. Frostbite is going to give us additional increased damage to chill targets. We chill targets all the time with our Frozen Orb, with our Frost Nova, so this one applies basically all the time. And it's going to give us additional damage reduction after an enemy is no longer frozen. This happens sometimes, especially versus Elite, so having 30% additional damage reduction in that case is really great. Another option for this one is Charged. Charged is going to give us 15% more damage because we have a ton of crackling energy spawning all the time. So we pick this one up and then we have 15% more damage. And then we're going to flesh out this build. There is a ton of additional damage reduction versus chilled. There is 12% here, 3% here, 3% here, 3% here, another 9% here, another 12% here. So a ton of additional damage reduction. We have damage reduction here with 8% right here. We can grab non-physical damage right here with additional maximum life. We have 10% lucky hit chance right here. And we can grab at the end the Frigid Fate, which gives us a lucky hit chance boost whenever we deal cold damage to vulnerable enemies. So this one is not going to stack up all the time to 15, but if we pick up those nodes, it's just 4 points. So grab this at the end. So this sums up the build. Like I said, a disclaimer, the Frozen Orb is not influenced by lucky hit chance. This one is straight up just like Nature's Fury. You cast, you proc, no lucky hit chance. Anyway, make sure to leave a like, make sure to comment if you have any questions, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. You can also join the channel membership for additional emotes and badges, so you can support me some more. And if you have the spare coin, you can also leave a donation through the PayPal link in the description box. See you next time and bye.